Hey, everyone. Welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. We've got a really great guest on today. His past clients and brand experience while freelancing include FAANG companies such as Google and other high-profile companies like General Mills, Sony Pictures Entertainment, Postmates, and Ford. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Patterson. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Are you ready for 20 questions?
I am.
Okay, question one. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Businesses come to me when they're looking for a designer that's proficient and strategic. I've been doing design in some sense for about 20 years, and I hold a BFA in visual communications and spent the early part of my career in advertising and marketing. But for the past 14 years, I've been freelancing full time running my own business. And my official title is Freelance Senior Product Design Generalist, which basically means I design software, apps, websites for companies. And in this line of work, you have to have a combination of technical skills to really understand how all the pieces of a client's business fit together, as well as the creative dexterity to be able to execute on those insights. But more often than not, I'm blending everything from creative direction to experience design to launch mobile apps, software, and websites. I'm a sole proprietorship, which means I have no employees, and that's by design. And I work from my home office here in Michigan.
Great, sounds great. Just a note for the audience, if you guys are interested in the big 2025 episode so far, check out the episode with Kareem Rashid. It was a great episode. Question two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
I think of myself as a holistic designer, able to transcend disciplines. And I've learned design's fundamentals and can really bend and shape them to enhance anything that requires a visual touch. So while my degree is in visual design, I know how color theory, negative space, and contrast, and all the other fundamentals translate to various mediums. So whether I'm designing something digital like an app or a software interface, or in my personal life, like commissioning somebody to make a bespoke piece of furniture, I rely on those design principles to really inform my decisions.
Great, love it. Question three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
My objective is to really remain in demand while being able to flex my creative skills. So, in some sense, I do product design work because the market demands it, and but in another sense, I do it because I enjoy it.
Great. Some people struggle with number four, but the question is, what does your future look like?
Looking at this through the lens of the work that I do, I think the agentic era of technology is on my radar. And for those who aren't familiar with this term, it basically refers to artificial intelligence that performs a set of actions on behalf of a user, like booking a flight or scheduling an appointment or like making a reservation. So I'm thinking about how the agentic era factors into my client's work, as well as how I position my own work. And like on the client side, I have to consider how an AI agent would interact with the software and websites I design. I'm imagining there's probably some low hanging fruit to address that will make the experiences I design better for agents. But on a more personal level, I'm thinking about, okay, what changes do I need to make to keep my portfolio website discoverable and easy to navigate? But that said, I'm well aware of the criticisms around AI, especially when it comes to like IP or intellectual property. But I'm optimistic about technology in general, and as a designer, really the role that I play in designing for it.
Great, perfect. Five we say is unique to this show. The question is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Well, more often than not, I'm working remotely, and clients are fine working with me like that if they're confident I can deliver on their project and be available during regular business hours, or at a minimum, communicate clearly asynchronously in Slack. But you can do product design work from anywhere, or at least I can. And I started freelancing full time in 2011 and had not found it imperative to travel for any of my work. But now I have worked on site when projects come up that are local, but that's definitely exception and not the rule. I think what really makes working remotely successful is accountability, and not just in the creative work itself, but also in the various promises that the work requires me to make, like sending an update like I said I would, or following up on a question that came up when I was working with a client that I promised. But in the grand scheme of things, I think these seem small, but they actually matter because they build credibility, even if the client isn't consciously keeping track.
Great. Six, if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
Um, I would tell myself to be more vocal about my story. Yeah, as a Black male in technology, there aren't usually a lot of folks in the room who look like me or who share my experience. But I think it's a difficult thing to know how representation impacts your understanding of what's possible, especially if you've never had to think about it. And this applies more broadly too. I think any underrepresented group, whether we're talking about ethnicity, ability, or anything else, gets a better sense of what's possible when they see themselves represented, no matter the profession. But along with that, I would also tell myself to write more. As a designer, it's a bit foreign, but over the years, I've grown to really appreciate writing much more. And that's definitely a way to tell your story. Yeah, not to mention writing implication on the work we do as designers goes a long way too. So one of the things I really like about writing, um, and it wasn't until fairly recently that I was able to hone in on this, is that I enjoy the descriptive, like imagery evoking side of it. Writing that leaves a clear visual in the reader's mind. And I'm sure this stems from my background in design. But again, writing has really no shortage of connections to the product design work, whether it's like UX writing or marketing copy and so forth. So I tell myself to write more, and it gets easier and more fun the more you do it.
Nice. And what's a day in your life like?
Well, as an independent product designer, there's really no shortage of tasks that I tend to on a daily basis to keep things operating smoothly. Client work, making decisions about software and tools to buy, financial and operating decisions, IT issues, the list goes on. So I try to front load most of my creative work to avoid decision fatigue, which is this psychological principle where every decision you make reduces your ability to perform well. I do that because I want my creative work to really get the best version of me. But in terms of client work specifically, the types of projects I work on and what the day looks like can definitely change. Sometimes I work alone. Other times companies hire me to work alongside their CEO or a broader team remotely. But in either case, I'm predictably in the office at 9, available on Slack all day for impromptu conversations, or if somebody I'm working with has a question or something that I need to answer. But on days when I'm not working on client projects, I build my brand by writing, through social networking, working on my portfolio. And that's a big one because the portfolio really serves as a design piece in and of itself. And people who follow me know that I will not shut up about the power of the portfolio. It's really the front door to my business. So I'm always thinking about how it factors into my next project.
Great. Eight is around lifelong learning. It's a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
I consume everything: podcasts, tutorials, articles. But beyond that, I make it a point to surround myself with people who are just as passionate about this work as I am. And I'm not shy about reaching out to people online. When you're independent, you don't have a built-in network of coworkers, so you have to actively create those connections. And in fact, some of my strongest professional relationships and close friendships have come from taking a genuine interest in what other people are up to. I also try to attend different virtual and in-person meetups. For example, I was recently at this demo day for this entrepreneurship hub in Detroit. It's called Tech Town. But that wasn't so much about learning specific skills as it was about like staying clued into what local founders are building. Um, but in terms of like hands-on skills and lifelong learning, I'm definitely a big fan of like creating side projects. I use that time to try out new ideas, stuff that might not be suitable for client work. But more often than not, it's like those projects that end up teaching me something, whether like it's a new skill or a different approach. Um, but I also make it a point to like try out new software that I could complement my offering with. So when clients work with me, they never really have to look anywhere else to find a product designer who knows what they're talking about.
Great. Nine is about tools. Do you use both digital and analog tools?
Yes, you know, definitely pen and paper. That's always that's analog. I certainly use that. Um, yeah, in product design, we have Figma, um, but past that, I use like Adobe Illustrator to create vector iconography and graphics. I use a program called Blender to create 3D graphics. There's another piece of software I use called Webflow to code my designs. And more recently, I've been incorporating this tool called Spline into my workflow. So I might use Blender to make a 3D model, then bring it into Spline to add some interactivity, and then pull it all together in Webflow. But I also use ChatGPT to refine some of my writing. Um, but you know, that's software in the traditional sense. But I think a tool can be anything that helps you get work done. So always open on my machine is Spotify. And for reference, fun fact, my Spotify rap said that I was in the top 1% of listeners last year. But I find that music is, you know, it offers some form of like inspiration for the work that I do. And I listen to everything, you know, Max Richter, Dead Mouse, you name it, I probably listen to it.
Nice. Halfway number 10. How do you deal with work life or life work balance?
Um, well, okay, I'll preface it with this. Like in the design business, it's common to think of yourself as just being a designer, but I think, you know, freelance designers are business owners too. So operate as much as it makes sense, like, you know, other firms. I keep a regular schedule. As I mentioned, I take an hour-long lunch break. I try to leave the office every day around the same time. Um, I, you know, even if you're in the office working consistently all day without distractions, you would be surprised at how much you can actually get done. So come 5 p.m., I put in an honest day's work and I'm ready to go offline.
Perfect. If you weren't doing what you do now, what might you be doing?
Definitely something that requires design acumen, most likely. Flipping houses, furniture design, maybe even fine art or sculpture.
What would you not like to do with your career?
Uninspired work. One of the things I dislike most about product design is that the work that gets the most attention is not always the best design. Too often it's work that follows a big company's aesthetic or, you know, something visually striking, but that's really not practical to execute. You know, I think the reach that those companies or people have creates this false narrative that this is what good design has to look like, when in reality, good design or product design can really take on many different forms so long as it solves a problem. Um, you know, good design doesn't necessarily have to follow trends. I'm less interested in doing work that looks like everything else and more interested in creating work that solves business problems. And the absolute best clients I work with really understand that value proposition, even if they don't articulate it that way.
Great. How about a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
I have a lot. It's hard to pick just one. This is not verbatim, but the gist is you must either face the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. It's from this motivational speaker who goes by the name of Jim Rohn, I believe. And that quote resonates with me and maybe some of the listeners because I think finishing what we start is painful, takes focus. Sometimes that can be over many days and weeks, months, or longer. And in the moment, it's easy to kind of walk away and convince yourself that something that you're working on is not worth the energy. But you know that relief is only temporary that you get if you stop. And it comes with another type of pain, which is wondering what could have happened if you would have finished. Neither is easy, but when I find myself struggling to push through something that I really believe in, the quote reminds me, you know, to figure out which type of pain I'm willing to settle for.
Nice. 14. How about a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Uh, I'll go through. I'll go through quote. Think outside the box. It's a cliche about being original. If you have to say it, you're probably in that box too.
You're choosing one word to describe yourself. What word do you choose?
Purely to emphasize another dimension of my personality, I'll go with sanguine. I can see the silver lining in almost any situation.
What keeps you up at night?
Good ideas that I have that I have not written down yet that I don't want to forget.
What's a dream you're chasing?
Hmm. Okay, that's a hard one for me. I'll leave it at this. I try to just give 100% every day.
Hmm. Okay, last few here. What inspires you?
Many things, but I'll rattle off a few, maybe a couple. Skill, that's number one, or at least a high one. I try to surround myself with people that I admire, people who are good at what they do. Um, there's this saying, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's you're the average of the five closest relationships that you have, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. So I try to be intentional about the people that I keep close, both professionally and personally. Another thing I would say that inspires me is cinema. Um, Usually, when I'm watching a movie, I'm very preoccupied by the cinematography, the special effects, set design, all the other creative elements that go into it. And then maybe one more thing I'd say is like hope inspires me. And what I mean by that is if I have a goal that I want to accomplish, as long as I can see some path forward, it's not impossible. As long as I have hope, there's still a way.
Nice. And any advice you'd like to share?
Well, as a lot of people are experiencing, we're definitely navigating through some difficult times in design and technology and white collar jobs in general. So I'd encourage anybody who's self employed to really think about the bigger picture besides earned income. Figure out a way to make some passive income streams. And there's no shortage of ways either. Um, I'd also say to work with a CPA, which is a certified public accountant. They can point you in the right direction when you're just starting out. But past that, think about how to make your income work harder for you. I'd say to look at financial instruments like certificates of deposit, IRAs. Those are two easy ways to grow your income that are risk free and unlike the stock market. But you shouldn't sleep on that either. I think none of us are looking to be the Wolf of Wall Street, who are designers, but learning the basics is not as hard as it seems. You can buy stock and hold on to it as an investment and be fairly hands off. Um, but I think as a freelancer, you have to look at your income more holistically. Client work is one component, but putting that income to work for you after you've earned it will help you dodge the punches that freelance life throws.
Great. And finally, number 20. How can our listeners keep tabs on you and what's our call to action?
Well, for the more studious take, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. Um, if you're into design inspiration and memes, follow me on Blue Sky at John Patterson. And definitely check out my portfolio website, which I definitely spent a lot of time designing. It's got a bunch of fun animations and interactions, so I think it captures my vibe and my work pretty well.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining today. You have a very confident way of answering the questions, and it's a pleasure to hear you respond to them. Thanks so much.
Well, I appreciate being on the podcast.